Hi BookTube, it's Amy and I'm here with a Monday Reads video. Read a couple of books this week, started in on another one. It was a good reading week overall. Spent some time reading on my lunch breaks the end of last week. A new release, which is a little bit unusual for my channel. I don't often read new releases. But this is something called Breakaway, the PWHL and the Women Who Changed the Game. Published by Carissa Donkin, Goose Lane Publishers. I was able to purchase this on Amazon. And what this is a kind of history overview of how the PWHL, the Professional Women's Hockey League in North America, came to be. It starts out in the early 2000s, looking at some of the different, quote, professional hockey leagues that existed in Canada and the United States. They were professional in name only because in those earlier iterations, players were not paid. They largely relied on their own resources to get themselves to and from games, to buy their own equipment. And there were a few different leagues that came and went, different iterations. Of course, hockey leagues are tremendously expensive to run, from the equipment for all the players, to ice time, to figuring out how to sell tickets to fans. Nothing really stuck. Women were not paid at all, or later on, significantly underpaid compared to men's professional hockey leagues. And, kind of the rationale, the thinking, or the justification was, well, people don't watch women's sports. People only want to see the men's sports. And the PWHL has shown in 2024 and 2025 that simply isn't true at all. The first PWHL game was played on New Year's Day 2024, and it started with 6 original teams. We have Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal and New York and Minnesota, and who am I missing here? I'm missing someone. Who am I missing? Anyway, there's 6 teams. I'm trying to think who I'm missing here. Minnesota, New York. Anyway, my mind is drawing a blank, but going into the 3rd season, they've added a team for Vancouver, British Columbia, and Seattle, Washington. The first expansion to a total of 8 teams. And I was here in Ottawa from the very first season. I wasn't there, for Ottawa's opening game. The first PWHL game was played in Toronto, I believe. But I wasn't there for the opening game here in Ottawa either. But I did see a couple of games that very first season of Winter 2024. And then I got the half-season ticket package for the 2024-2025 season, with the games beginning last November, December, and running into the spring of this year. And now, of course, we are all eagerly awaiting the beginning of the 3rd season. But this was a great book. From the Montreal perspective, focused largely on Montreal's team and on some of the very well-known players in the Montreal Victoire, including Marie-Philip Poulin, one of the greatest Canadian hockey players, perhaps one of the greatest hockey players, period, to play the game. Marie-Philip Poulin and several other Montreal Victoire players are Olympic gold medalists, and that's one of the great things about the league too. There is such a vast amount of talent, simply because the talent pool they were drawing on included, a lot of Women's World Series and Olympic gold and silver medalists from past years. But there's a great timeline in the front of the book here, beginning in March of 1990, when the first Women's World Championship was held. And it was held here, right here in Ottawa, actually, in TD Place, where the Ottawa Charge are currently playing. And back in March of 1990, Canada defeated the United States for the gold 5-2 before I was on this earth. We go into the late 90s. There was the National Women's Hockey League, the NWHL, that no longer exists. There was the COWHL, the Central Ontario Women's Hockey League, which no longer exists. There was the CWHL, around about 2007, the Canadian Women's Hockey League, which no longer exists. There was the National Women's Hockey League, rebranded as the Premier Hockey Federation, and several iterations. Then you had a period of time where there was an American Women's League, where the players were paid, and no Canadian League for a short period of time. A number of the key players got together and basically formed a players' union, which allowed them to advocate for themselves, for getting their equipment paid for, and for simply getting a salary, a livable salary, and in some ways controlling their own schedule. For a while there was a league where they weren't really paid. It expanded to a couple of teams in Japan, I believe. But some of these players were playing a game halfway across the country, or perhaps in another country, and then flying back to go to work on Monday because they had to make a living. But that's all changed, and the league is in its third season, and I am really excited to see the talent grow. But yes, this was an excellent book. Highly recommend it. I purchased it on Amazon, and you can probably find it there as well. But as far as I know, it's the first nonfiction work here published on the history and founding of the Professional Women's Hockey League. So there's that. And then, and I don't have the dust jacket here. The dust jacket's over on the shelf. But I read My Canadian Journal by Lady Dufferin, who was the wife of Canadian Governor General Lord Dufferin, who, interestingly enough, and I didn't know this until I began to read the foreword here in the introduction, Lord Dufferin was the great-grandson of Sheridan, who wrote School for Scandal, and I've got an illustrated edition of the School for Scandal, the play, back there on my shelf. But I didn't know there was a relationship. So Lord Dufferin, who was the Governor General of Canada and later went on to a number of other diplomatic appointments, including, I think, in India. I think he was actually, Governor General of India for several years in the 1880s, if I remember right. Lord Dufferin was a descendant of Sheridan, and so it's, not surprising that there would be literary talent in that family. And Lord Dufferin himself, I think, published some of his journals, or an account of his journey up into the Arctic. And his wife, Lady Dufferin, kept a journal, which I think she sent back to her mother in letter form over the course of their 5-year stay in Canada. Lady Dufferin kept a journal, a very engaging and well-written journal that talks about their journey into Canada, the various places they lived, their social engagements, the kind of people they met, and it was just absolutely fascinating. It was my train reading this weekend. And so she begins with their arrival in Canada in June of 1872 and takes us up to their departure from Canada in August or midway through the year of 1878. And at that time, Ottawa wasn't really much to look at. She talks about how sort of ill-equipped Rideau Hall, the house, was when they first arrived. and the kind of redecorating and some of the renovations and expansions that they did. They talk about, a cottage on the grounds, which I could be wrong, but the cottage on the grounds is actually where the Prime Minister and his family lives these days, because 24 Sussex is unlivable, and no one has yet put forward the money for renovations to make it habitable. But she talks about setting up house in Rideau, and how they didn't really spend most of the summers here at all. They mainly wintered in Ottawa, spent the months that the House of Commons and the Senate were sitting, because of course Lord Dufferin needed to be on hand for government business and to preside over certain things as the Governor General. But apart from those months when they weren't needed in Ottawa, they spent quite a good portion of their first couple of years in various areas of Quebec, in Quebec City, in Montreal, and in a more rural community where they actually had a house built. Enjoyed, canoeing and salmon fishing and all sorts of outdoor activities. And then they went on several tours over the course of their service here in Canada, going out to the East Coast, going all over Ontario by train. It was interesting to be, riding the Via Rail train on the tracks and reading about points where they stopped off and going, oh yes, Kingston, Cobourg, Napanee. These are all still stops on the Via Rail line. And then, of course, trips farther out west, which in these days before the railway had been completed to the west coast out to BC, that required going down south into the United States and going up that way, because it was simply, faster and safer, because there weren't easy routes to get out west in those days. She talks about spending time in Victoria and Vancouver on the west coast, meeting people from various Indigenous nations, and she's not always, I would say, charitable in her descriptions of certain people that she meets, but it was certainly colored by her view of the world at that time, and overall I think she was a very kind and gracious person, it seems, always ready to take on the social role, to be kind to everyone that she met. It certainly, you think, oh, being Lady Dufferin, the wife of the Governor General, that must have been an easy life. But no, it required a lot of travel, often through harsh conditions in the Canada of the 1870s. Always being ready to, serve as hostess and to sit and meet hundreds upon hundreds of people who just wanted to, introduce themselves, shake her hand, offer a gift. And doing that, even when she was ill or tired or exhausted from a trip, or, hadn't had a proper meal. And it's interesting too, the depictions of family life and just, early Ottawa. She talks about going to the Chaudière Falls, which at this time were surrounded by logging operations and I think eventually, pulp and paper mills. But at the time she talks about, going down a chute, and it's difficult to imagine exactly what she's describing. And, I wonder what she was wearing as she did this. But early on in her arrival, she was taken to the Chaudière Falls and shown the logging operations. And she sits in some sort of, I guess, watercraft that goes down this, chute on an angle, kind of like a fun, log water slide or something, and sends her, shooting out into the river. And she says that she, really enjoyed it and would recommend it, but she couldn't recommend it to any of her companions because she was now, miles farther down the river, and had to be picked up and go home another way compared to those who hadn't decided to take this adventurous ride. And she was definitely suited to Canada, always willing to take the outdoor adventure, do the daring thing, and her children with her. She had 2 young children that they brought with them to Canada when they arrived, leaving their 2 oldest children at boarding school. And then she gave birth, I think, to 2 more children while they were living here. The first one that was born here, so their 5th child, I believe, Queen Victoria was actually that child's godmother. And so there is at one point in a letter where she mentions, Queen Victoria has written asking to be godmother, and later on she receives a doll as a gift from her godmother, which she is quite enamored with. Descriptions of Christmas, of sledding, of skating on the ice, and tragedy as well. Someone falling into the river and drowning on a salmon fishing trip, various tragedies like that. Someone who was injured in a sledding accident and incapacitated for several months, and just when they think he's gotten better, just when he's regained his ability to walk and go about his life, becomes ill with something else that carries him off within a couple of days. And seems genuinely sad when it comes time for her to leave Canada. Of course, these appointments as Governor General are only for a limited amount of time. I think usually a period of 4 or 5 years. I think on occasion it's been longer for some Governor Generals. But there's this, gradual farewell where there's some people who have been with them who go back to England, and she acknowledges that, when this person returns to Canada from England, she will no longer be there. And of course, the farewell to Ottawa, and it's the 1870s, so it's not, a quick out of here. It's, you say goodbye to Ottawa, and now you're going to travel eastward, saying goodbye to people and communities as you go, until finally she goes back to England, leaving her husband to wrap a few things up and join her a few months later. And I'd have to look into it to see whether Lady Dufferin wrote any more journals or letters, because I certainly would like to read more of her. And I would think if she documented so well her years in Canada, she might have documented some of her husband's other diplomatic appointments as well over the years, or perhaps her time at their estate in Ireland. But overall, just an absolutely fascinating book, and it was fun to discover the association between Dufferin and Sheridan. And I will point out that this edition was published in 1967. And then I've got one more here. I started reading also on the train. Another book memoir. This is by David Magee, with an introduction by Lawrence Clark Powell. This is Infinite Riches, The Adventures of a Rare Book Dealer. There's a cellophane jacket on here, so there's a little bit of a glare, unfortunately. But this is a book memoir from 1973. We've got a fun caricature, a cartoon here at the front of the book. But this is The Adventures of a Rare Book Dealer, and I'm not very far in. So far, he's only talked about the reading in his childhood. He seems to have a bit of a quirky personality, but I guess he later went on to run an antiquarian book business out of San Francisco in the United States. So that will be an interesting one to dig further into later this week. But I better wrap up this video now because it's almost time for Monday Night Football, NFL, out of the United States. So that is what I will be doing this evening, and perhaps, reading a few chapters during halftime.